COVID, and all the piles of the different challenges that we are facing. I'm confident that this discussion will be the beginning of many yet to come, so that we tie the knots together and we make sure that we are aligned in exactly the same subjects that worry us coming from this part of the world. We see firsthand what's happening in many discussions. We see how children are growing up in the rubbles of freedom, so that we generations lost, no any kind of education or health services, none whatsoever. And this is an excellent recipe for those children to do what's happening in the United States and then come to the terrorist organization. Again, I would like to conclude and say thank you so much for being here, and I'm sure that this is an amazing productive meeting with the expertise and the valuable for those children, each and every one of these lives. Thank you again, and take care and see you again. Again, wish you all a very fruitful meeting. So much for being here, and I'm sure that this is
a dedicated counterterrorism committee. Honorable Mayor Dear Gennaro, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, caro Mauro. Excellencies, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this meeting. First, I wish to thank Ambassador Voronkov and the UN Office on Counterterrorism for joining very much, Mr. Chair. Our meeting presents an opportunity to sign a memorandum of understanding to formally reinforce our excellent cooperation. The partnership between the PAM and the UN Office on Counterterrorism conjoined very much the gaps between parliamentary action and the global counterterrorism strategies, and reinforce unity and coherence in the work of the international community. I am confident that this milestone agreement will pave the way for even more concrete results that we can achieve through joint actions. Dear colleagues, today we are here to discuss the challenges of the post-territorial ISIL context. The issue of ISIL survivors and foreign terrorist fighters in northern Syria and Iraq continues to represent an unsolved security challenge for the PAM region and the wider world. Thousands of ISIL fighters are held in makeshift prisons, and tens of thousands of women and children are camps guarded by non-state armed groups. In this unstable condition, there are frequent episodes of violence, jailbreaks, persistent radicalization, and dire humanitarian condition. In these prisons and camps, there is no accountability and no mindful justice for horrific crime committed. It is the responsibility of the international community as a whole to ensure that all ISIL-affected individuals undergo due judicial process in line with national and international law. In many cases, the role of women and the extent of their active involvement in the atrocities and crimes committed by ISIL remains unclear. Nonetheless, support for radical ISIL ideas remains persistent among many of the residents of the camp. There is a clear risk that these conditions are breeding ground for next generation of ISIL supporters, as many children are faced with the war-related trauma, persistent radicalization, and the issue of the statelessness, as many remain without a recognized nationality or citizenship. At PM, we have already worked on this issue in depth. I would like to highlight three key priorities. First, to address the humanitarian crisis and the security threat represented by ISIL survivors, countries must take full responsibility for their national health in Syria and Iraq. Second, the international community has to work for the establishment of a legal and operational mechanism to facilitate repatriation. In this regard, through an adopted resolution, PAM has supported an idea for the establishment of an international mechanism to assist states in the repatriation of their nationals. Third, a comprehensive approach is needed to ensure, when appropriate, the full rehabilitation of individuals. In doing so, it is key that we always prioritize the fate of children that should be treated first and foremost as victims. Dear colleagues, moreover, thousands of foreign terrorist fighters and ISIL affiliates have already been convicted of terrorism-related crimes and are going through the justice system in our own country, such as those in Vienna last year, have demonstrated that there is a significant danger posed by terrorist recidivism. In Vienna, the perpetrator of the attack was previously convicted and imprisoned for attempting to join ISIL in Syria, and while in prison, he participated in de-radicalization programs. He was released in accordance with national law. Nonetheless, shortly afterward, he was able to travel across borders seeking to buy automatic weapons, and he eventually carried out a brutal attack on innocent civilians in the heart of the city center of Vienna. PAM parliaments needs to address to this issue from a policy level with particular attention to the following 3 points. First, it is crucial to understand the possible danger posed by released convicts and to ensure that national legislative frameworks provide for sufficient safeguards against the threat of terrorism recidivism. Second, as lawmakers, we need to be aware of the challenge in balancing and often needed post-release monitoring measures against constitutional norms and the fundamental freedoms guaranteed in our countries. Third, the effectiveness of long-term solutions such as de-radicalization and rehabilitation programs should be re-evaluated. To do so, we can derive a useful lesson from the past while building on successful national experiences and best practices. Dear colleagues, last but not least, we must remain vigilant and pay close attention to those parts of the world where terror activity is on the rise. At present, we are seeing a fertile for expansion throughout the Sahel due to localized conflicts, governance vacuums, lack of development and economic opportunity, and proliferation of arms. We need to work with our partners in the Sahel and all relevant stakeholders to reinforce counterterrorism and development measures in order to prevent another proto-state project by jihadist forces. Dear colleagues, the aim of this meeting is twofold. The first objective is to collect best practices, national perspectives, and the opinions of the experts to be included in the drafting of the resolution that will be presented at the next plenary session later this year. The second objective is to map out the next step based on priority issues for enhancing our cooperation with the UN Office on Counterterrorism in view of the signature of our cooperation agreement, as well as with all our partners present today. Before I conclude, I would like to note that just last week, PAM and San Marino signed an historical agreement for the establishment of the research center, which will reinforce the Secretariat's capacity to support our parliaments with the research and analysis on critical issues such as counterterrorism, which will further strengthen our common efforts. Dear colleagues, I look forward to our discussion and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Honorable Migliore. Caro Gennaro, I think you are the example of leadership, both when you were in government and you were among the first that allowed the adoption of specific legislation in Italy on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2178. And you have continued this leadership with your parliamentary mandate, including as chair of the Standing Committee, and your efforts to bring the issue of repatriation at the core of the work of parliamentarians is really much appreciated by all of us. Thank you once more. And let me also take the opportunity to thank our colleagues in the UN, because this first part of this event is also being live streamed on the UN TV channel. So thanks particularly to all those colleagues who have worked towards that. I'm now most pleased, of course, to invite our Under-Secretary General for Counterterrorism, Ambassador Vladimir Ivanovich Voronkov, to deliver his statement and remarks. Mr. Voronkov, USG, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mauro. Excellencies, distinguished members of Parliament, dear colleagues. It's my pleasure to welcome you at today's joint meeting of the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. It's an honor to deliver my opening remarks alongside with the PAM President Emeritus, Senator Alia Buran, and the chair of PAM's Special Parliamentary Committee on Counterterrorism, Honorable Gennaro Migliore. Gennaro, welcome from New York. I would also like to warmly welcome the Speaker of the Shura Council of Qatar, His Excellency Mr. Al Mahmoud, and the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations Counterterrorism Committee Executive Directorate, Madam Konings. UNOCT recognizes the critical role played by members of Parliament in preventing and countering terrorism and violent extremism. This is why, with the generous support of the Shura Council of Qatar, UNOCT will be opening a program office on parliamentary engagement in Doha in the coming months. To effectively and sustainably deliver our mandate and promote a whole of society approach to countering terrorism, we rely on strong partnerships, including with PAM, the Inter-Parliamentary Union, and the OSCE and Commonwealth of Independent States Parliamentary Assemblies. Distinguished members of parliaments, dear colleagues, the focus of today's discussion fully reflects the United Nations concerns and demonstrates that parliaments are vital partners in addressing the complex challenges brought by the foreign terrorist fighter phenomenon. We rely on parliamentarians to work hand in hand with governments to adopt legal frameworks and policies to implement the global counter-terrorist strategy and relevant Security Council resolutions. This includes Security Council resolutions 2178, 2014, and 2396, 2017, which call on member states to criminalize activities related to foreign terrorist fighters in compliance with international law. While effective laws are necessary to tackle such threats, they are not sufficient. Without comprehensive prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration responses, there are significant risks of broken lives, fractured communities, and endless cycles of recidivism and violence. Representing people and constituencies, you have the power to facilitate the development of such responses in order to avoid stigmatization and social exclusion or returned individuals and prevent further radicalization. The matter is increasingly urgent. Following ISIL's territorial defeat, foreign terrorist fighters continue to pose a serious threat, including in the Mediterranean. In particular, I am deeply concerned with the complex situation of ISIL-associated women and children who are detained in dire conditions in camps in northeast Syria. ISIL's encouragement of escapes, violence in the camps, and the continued threat of COVID-19 highlight the urgency for member states to repatriate their nationals from Syria and Iraq. It's urgent to bring these people, first of all children, back to their home countries. At the recent Security Council area formal meeting on repatriation of children with alleged family ties to terrorist groups from conflict zones, I stressed that the best interests of these children should be in overarching consideration to address this challenge. Shortly after ISIL's territorial defeat in March 2019, the Secretary General Guterres issued a set of key principles for the protection, repatriation, prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration of women and children with links to United Nations listed terrorist groups. Based on these principles, as well as relevant Security Council resolutions, UNOCT and UNICEF led the development of a global framework on United Nations support to member states on individuals returned from Syria and Iraq, bringing together 15 UN entities. We stand ready to assist member states to implement comprehensive, gender-responsive, and age-sensitive prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration approaches in line with international law, which must hold individuals accountable while promoting social cohesion and community reintegration. Excellencies, dear colleagues, I would like to commend PAM's Secretary General Sergio Piazza for mainstreaming counterterrorism-related issue in PAM's agenda. I am glad that in a few minutes we will sign a long-awaited memorandum of understanding between UNOCT and PAM, further consolidating our partnership. Through its new parliamentary office in Doha, UNOCT is looking forward to working with PAM and the global parliamentary community to achieve a safer world, one without terrorism, for present and future generations. I thank you.
Dear Mr. Voronkov, dear Under-Secretary General, thank you very much for your opening statement. And indeed, really, a role of society approach to countering terrorism is certainly not possible without the engagement of the parliamentarians and the multilateral cooperation, parliamentary cooperation that only multilateral parliamentary assemblies can ensure. And that's why our office is strongly looking at fostering such cooperation, in addition, of course, to the Inter-Parliamentary Union, but also with all of the regional parliamentary assemblies. And we are fully committed to fostering this partnership and through it to deliver our counterterrorism mandate. It is therefore an historical moment, if I may say, that the one we are approaching now, which is definitely the moment we could sign a memorandum of understanding between the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean and the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism. I would therefore, without any further ado, invite both Under-Secretary General Ambassador Vladimir Voronkov and Honorable Gennaro Migliore as chair of the PAM Counterterrorism Committee to proceed with signing the Memorandum of Understanding. Please. You have the pen ready. That's perfect. Can we also see Mr. Migliore, Honorable Migliore, on the screen at the same time?
Gennaro, ready?
Gennaro, maybe you have to unmute yourself and please be ready to sign. That's the paper have been, of course, signed already, and we are, of course, dealing with the virtual ceremony, but it is a greatest and historical moment that I think deserves a round of applause from all of us now that virtually, but also physically, we have a memorandum signed. Thank you very much.
We need something more than that is not only virtual. Next time we sign all together. I hope so.
I think it's unavoidable. We will do this.
Okay.
Thank you both, Mr. Voronkov and Honorable Migliore, very much for this e-signing event. And the MOU will certainly provide really a very practical and action-oriented framework for our cooperation. A cooperation, of course, that will unfold immediately through another historical event that we have witnessed, which has been the launch and the signing of the Program Office on Parliamentary Engagement of UNOCT that will be opening very soon in the city of Doha, thanks to the outstanding support of the Shura Council of Qatar. It is therefore my greatest honor and pleasure to welcome and invite His Excellency, the Speaker of the Shura Council of the State of Qatar, to take the floor. Your Excellency, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency Alia Baran, President Emeritus of the PAM and the first Standing Committee on Political and Security related to cooperation. Your Excellency Mr. Gennaro Migliore, the Chair of the Committee on Counterterrorism of the PAM, Your Excellency Mr. Vladimir Voronkov, Under Secretary General of the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, Your Excellency Ms. Michel Konings, Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Director of the United Nations Counterterrorism Committee Executive Directorate. Dear friends, dear brothers and sisters, God's peace and mercy be with you. First and foremost, I would like to congratulate from the bottom of my heart Mr. Vladimir Voronkov, the Under Secretary General and head of the UN Office of Counterterrorism, and to His Excellency Mr. Gennaro Migliore, the President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean Committee and His Excellency Mr. Sergio Biazzi, the Secretary General of this Assembly, in the occasion of the signature of the Memorandum of Understanding between the UN Office of Counterterrorism and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. I have no doubt that this Memorandum of Understanding is going to framework the cooperation and coordination between the two parties, and it is going to mobilize parliamentarians to support the UN Office of Counterterrorism. And as you all know, the Shura Council, the Consultative Assembly of the State of Qatar, is undergoing huge efforts in this sense. And that's why I personally was in the headquarters of the UN in New York. And I signed with His Excellency, the very good friend Vladimir Voronkov, in representation of the UN. In the 17th of February, we undersigned the Memorandum of Understanding of cooperation between the Shura Council in Qatar and the UN Office of Counterterrorism. And on the 25th of November 2020, we undersigned also the agreement for the establishment of the Office for the UN program in charge of parliamentary cooperation on fighting and countering terrorism. And this office will be placed in Doha, and it will support all world parliaments. And my colleague, Mr. Dahlan Jaman Al-Hamad, member of the Consultative Assembly, the Shura Council, and he will offer a presentation during the works of this committee. And in his presentation, he will give all details about the work of the office that we agreed on opening at the beginning of June of this year, 2021. Actually, the goals that we are seeking through the opening of this office is to reinforce the capacity of parliaments and parliamentarians to stop and face terrorism, because it is a scourge, it's a cancer that we need to eradicate in order to concentrate on sustainable development. So we hope to coordinate and to cooperate with the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. And the Shura Council, as you all know, is an observer member there. And we are going to participate also with the UN OCT in order to face terrorism and end up with terrorism, in order to make sure that the Mediterranean and all the world is just a place of safety and security, which are basic pillars in order to make sure that we fight marginalization, and in order to be able to put all our efforts towards fostering economic and social development. So I wish all of us luck and success in approaching counter-terrorism and putting the basis of parliamentary cooperation with the UN Office of Counter-Terrorism, and also the cooperation with the Office of the program that we agreed upon inaugurating soon in Doha, and that will definitely receive all of our support and help. And thank you very much for listening.
Your Excellency, Honorable Ahmad bin Abdullah Al Mahmoud, thank you so much once more for all of your support, for your personal strong commitment, and that, of course, of the Shura Council and the State of Qatar. As you say, we look really very much forward to opening our UNOCT program office in Doha in early June, with a big event that we hope would allow certainly people to travel to Doha. So it should be hopefully an in-person or at least hybrid event. And thank you once again for including your participation today. And I have now the honor and pleasure to give the floor to the last speaker of this first part of today's event, which is Her Excellency, Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director of the Counterterrorism Committee Executive Director, Madam Michel Konings, whom I would invite to take the floor. Dear Ms. Konings, please.
Thanks so much, Director Medico, and a good day to all of you excellencies and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor to address the Special Parliamentary Committee on Counterterrorism of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. And I wish to thank the PAM and the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism for organizing this event. I also wish to congratulate the PAM and the President Migliore and UNOCT and USG Vladimir Voronkov on signing a memorandum of understanding on future cooperation. At least now we know how e-signatures take shape online. Excellencies and distinguished colleagues, allow me to provide you with a brief overview of my office. It is the Executive Directorate of the Security Council Counterterrorism Committee, known as CTAT or CTED, before sharing CTAT's analyses of the current terrorism and counterterrorism landscape. CTAT is a special political mission established by the Security Council in its resolution 1535 to assist the Security Council, Counterterrorism Committee in its work. Our mandate includes the following core elements: assessing the implementation of relevant Security Council counterterrorism resolutions by member states and recommending ways to address any implementation gaps we identify, facilitating the delivery of technical assistance and expertise to strengthen states' counterterrorism capacities, building and promoting partnerships with relevant stakeholders to enhance international counterterrorism cooperation, and eventually analyzing new trends and challenges. In all our activities, we emphasize the need to ensure that states' counterterrorism and counter-violent extremism measures are underpinned by a human rights compliant and gender sensitive approach. Despite its loss of territorial control, ISIL remains a continuing threat in Iraq, both and in the Syrian Arab Republic. ISIL affiliates have also emerged in certain African regions, notably the Sahel, the Lake Chad Basin, Southern and Eastern Africa over recent years, posing significant challenges as we continue to seek justice for ISIL's victims. The multiple dimensions of the FTF phenomenon also continue to pose serious and complex challenges to many states. Stakeholders, particularly member states, continue to focus their attention on the situation of thousands of suspected FTFs and family members detained in camps in northern Syria. Violent extremism and radicalization to violence in prisons are further issues of increasing concern to many states, notably in Europe, Southeast Asia, and North and West Africa. Those states face significant challenges with record numbers of individuals in detention for terrorism-related offenses. And in these challenging circumstances, developing and implementing comprehensive and tailored prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration strategies for terrorist offenders is crucial. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, ISIL is far from being the only terrorist threat that confronts us all. The proliferation of extreme right-wing or racially and ethnically motivated terrorism is a cause of increasing concern, notably in Europe and North America. Countering use of the internet and other virtual platforms by terrorists for recruitment, financing, and planning purposes remains a priority as our continued efforts to counter terrorism financing. As emphasized in two recent CTAT analytical reports, the COVID-19 pandemic has further complicated an already challenging threat landscape. Terrorists and violent extremists have attempted to exploit socio-economic anxieties and other grievances to propagate their divisive agendas. Extreme right-wing actors have also sought to co-opt the COVID-19 pandemic to propagate unfounded conspiracy theories and incite violence and attacks. A whole of society approach that involves a broad range of stakeholders is really essential to effectively address these challenges. As this can be achieved only by enhancing multilateralism, international cooperation, and partnerships. I look forward to working together further with the PAM within the framework of our joint efforts to combat terrorism. And I wish you all a very successful meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Assistant Secretary General, Ms. Konings. Thank for your participation, for sharing seated analysis of the current trends and challenges. And also, thanks for your close collaboration with us. I think seated is really a vital partner for us in the UN, including in the way we could better support parliamentarians, because seated assessments are critical in terms of, together with the national governments and parliaments, you define the elements that may require refinement. And this is even more important when this year we are somehow commemorated the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the Resolution 1373. So thank you very much for your partnership and your support and your participation. And with that, we have reached the end for this high-level opening session. We, of course, are going now to move to the core of today's discussions about repatriation and prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration in the aftermath of ISIL's territorial defeat. And before doing that, I would like, of course, to thank all of the high-level speakers that have participated. Thank you once more for that. And let now move to opening the expert panel discussion, which, as we all know, will, of course, focus particularly on the source of concern posed by the thousands of suspected ISIL fighters and their family members that return home, or the situation of overcrowding in the camps and detention centers in Syria and Iraq. We have a very distinguished panel of real experts, and I would like first and foremost to welcome our first speaker, Mr. Dan Stigall, who is Deputy Chief of Staff and Counselor for International Affairs at the US Department of Justice, but also former Director for Counterterrorism in the White House National Security Council. It's a great pleasure, Dan, to see you again with us, and thanks for participating. Let me give you the floor without any further ado, please.
Mauro, thank you very much. And to all of the esteemed guests here and good friends, it's good to see you once again. At the outset, what I would like to do is talk to you briefly about one element of prosecution of detention.
Dan, may I interrupt you, because I think your video is off. Perhaps you wish to turn it on.
And the audio is also not very clear. Dan, if you could please speak into the microphone and turn your video on.
All right, my video is on. Are you able to see me? So my video is on.
We are unable to see you, so perhaps we just proceed with your audio if we cannot solve this, because we are unable to see you.
All right, let me.
Oh, somebody, actually, somebody can see you, and the video is on now. Perfect.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Dan.
Sorry about that. So with regard to the prosecution of detained foreign terrorist fighters, I think something for us to think about at the very beginning of this discussion is how we conceptualize that prosecution and the relationship between the ultimate disposition option that we want for the detained person and our policies regarding battlefield detention. Disposition options like prosecutions or reintegration, rehabilitation, those are not things that exist in a vacuum. We need to think about these things as outgrowths of our initial policies, culmination points, if you will, that are interrelated to the very, very first decisions that we make with regard to battlefield detention. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but that's sort of the frame that I would like to put around this initial part of the discussion. ISIS, as we know, challenged us as an international community and our global counterterrorism architecture in profound ways. We were, I think, as an international community, a bit unprepared for how well they would harness modern communication technology to recruit people to come into the caliphate, and the problems attendant with that successful recruitment effort. They recruited thousands of people from over 100 countries to come into their terrorist proto-state. And those people brought families, they brought children. And while there, they created children. And so that's left us with a host of problems that have been uniquely challenging. So I just want to talk about some of the things that we've, I think, had a hard time confronting. And one is the scale of the challenge. We're talking about enormous numbers of people. And that is some bigger problems are harder to solve. When you have large numbers of people, it means that your prisons need to be better resourced. It means that your investigations and prosecutions will require more personnel, more resources. It also means more risk. With larger numbers of people, we're talking about more opportunities for people to slip through the cracks and harm your country or your citizens. More can go wrong. So we know that about scale. But the deeply international nature of this problem, I think, also was something that caught us by surprise. We're looking at over 100 countries involved. I saw a UN report released recently, which talked about Raj and Al-Hol camps. I think they said 64,000 people detained there from 57 different countries. So when you have that sort of representation, global representation among the detainee population group, obviously international cooperation is going to be key. And as we've already noted, the importance of multilateral engagement is going to be important. But I think it's even more acute given the centrality of non-state actors in this situation. These individuals are detained, whether it's a foreign terrorist fighter or whether it's women and children in IDP camps. The detaining authority right now is a non-state actor, and that poses its own unique problems. These are actors who do not have the resources or the skill set or the training or the personnel that a state institution might have, and therefore the need for international cooperation and international support becomes even more important. But I think one of the things that has been even more problematic here has been the perennial, how should I say this, the less than optimal understanding of battlefield detention. by global policymakers and operators. And what I mean by that is battlefield detention is not of itself a disposition option. The detention that we're talking about here, whether it's Al-Hol or Raj Camp or the foreign terrorist fighters who are detained, they're detained under authorities that exist under international law for battlefield detention. But the idea of battlefield detention is that it's an interim measure. It's not meant to be the final disposition option. It's what you do while you're facilitating either the release of the individual to the home country for reintegration or rehabilitation, or the repatriation of that person to the home country for purposes of investigation and prosecution. When the detaining authority is someone else, somewhere else, as is the case here, frequently it's tempting to not think about that unpleasant aspect of battlefield detention. It's relentless impermanence. It's easy to think that the bill won't come due and no decision will ultimately need to be made. And in fact, we do have instances of some countries even stripping these people of their citizenship and thereby foisting the problem onto someone else. And sometimes the country that has to take responsibility has the resources to do it, but many do not. So I think what we need to understand is that the bill always comes due. And how we're able to affect an option and what options are presented to us when it's time for that decision point will be determined by the policies and the approach that we took at the very beginning, at the moment of capture. So when we approach battlefield detention, we need to approach it understanding that this is a temporary matter, that the circumstances of their detention, of these detained people, will dictate to us what our eventual options are. And let me talk a bit about that. If these individuals are not detained in a manner that comports with international law and international human rights norms, we know a couple of things will happen. One, and this has already been noted by speakers earlier today, terrorists in detention facilities, especially detention facilities that fall below those international standards, typically network. They become better terrorists. Innocent people, people who are vulnerable, who may not be terrorists yet, become radicalized. So the problem becomes worse. And as we've noted, the problem will not go away. We will eventually come to that point where we have to make some hard decisions about what we're going to do with these people. So if we go into the detention situation, understanding that we are going to eventually have we'll prosecute, then we can make appropriate decisions about resourcing, about the type of detention that we want, and with a view toward that eventual prosecution. On the part of the United States, thus far, we've been able to repatriate and prosecute every foreign terrorist fighter for which we've been able to develop charges. So far, we have repatriated 12 adults and 16 children from Iraq and Syria. When those families return, we take a case-by-case approach to determine whether or not prosecution or reintegration is the most appropriate option. But we still have a lot of lessons to learn. We still look forward to working with our international partners to better understand the different approaches that are available, and so that we can make sure that ultimately what lies at the end of that initial moment of capture is a durable disposition option that protects our country and the countries and the citizens of our international partners. I just close by noting that the status quo is unsustainable, and it's unsustainable because battlefield detention is always temporary. It cannot remain this way. And so we need to be thinking about our options for repatriation and reintegration. Repatriation will be necessary. If these individuals are not ultimately repatriated to their countries of origin, the only other option is release. And these are individuals who once upon a time found their way from where they were to the battlefield, and they will be able to find their way home again. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much to you, Dan, really for being concise, but for bringing a lot of meat, if I may, to the table. You have brought a lot of aspects that deserve much consideration. First, you talked about the unpreparedness of the international community, and now basically nobody was thinking that ISIL would, including through the radicalization. But also, I think your point that battlefield detention, it's an option that is not a standing alone option, that requires decision, that requires policies that need to accompany it. And unfortunately, that's what has happened. That much of this decision have not been taken. And your last point, which is particularly that of having a case-by-case approach, which is, of course, coming back to the individual. Every single individual comes from with a different history and story, and they may be still radicalized, or they may be victims in case of children. And that's why it's so fundamental that the policies that need to be developed be actually shared, and that our approach on a case-by-case is also fed and brought around the need of comparing experiences and solutions, because nobody has a one fit solution for all. Thank you very much for that really inspiring thoughts. I, of course, now move to our second speaker, who is Dr. Thomas Renard, who is a senior fellow at the Egmont Institute and an expert on counterterrorism and counter-radicalization both in Belgium and I would say in the world, Europe. Dear Thomas, thank you again for joining us, and you please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to UNOCT and to the PAM for inviting me and asking me to share my knowledge and expertise. Excellencies, distinguished members of parliament, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege for me, it's an honor for me to be here and speak to you about this topic of terrorist recidivism, which is a topic I would say quite important, quite on the news, but also on the policy agenda these days. I have a I spend the whole day teaching to students, so I will continue in a way in a form of lecturing, because I've prepared a very short PowerPoint just because I wanted to show basically just a few figures, and I think it's going to be easier if I can show you on my screen. So I will try to share my screen, and hopefully this works. Why we are interested, if not obsessed, with terrorist recidivism these days, it is due to the very large, unprecedented, one would say, numbers of terrorist convicts, but also, as was recalled by the previous speaker, individuals radicalized in prison, even though not necessarily convicted for terrorism as such, in the prisons around the world, in Europe, but also in the various countries of the Mediterranean, in North Africa, and in the Middle East, particularly in the context of the threat linked to the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. And of course, that large, unprecedented number of terrorist convicts means that on the one hand, we are confronted with this unprecedented challenge of managing terrorist offenders in prison, but also looming ahead, and as a matter of fact, we're already there, managing the release and rehabilitation and reintegration of these former terrorist offenders into society, and of course managing the risks of their rehabilitation and reintegration. And that risk, of course, the primary risk is that of recidivism. And if you allow me just a quick point of definition, because of course I'm an academic, I'm a scholar, but we need to understand what we mean by recidivism, because there are different ways of measuring recidivism. And I think most of us would understand terrorist recidivism as a person who's been convicted for terrorism and who reoffends into terrorism. But there's also different ways of understanding it, because of course, someone who goes out of prison and commits an attack and dies in the context of that attack will not be reconvicted for terrorism, but still, of course, it's a threat and would have been engaged in terrorism. And then we sometimes also use the term re-engagement. So recidivism, re-engagement, these are terms that we use to measure different things, but essentially the same risk. And of course, if it's so important to us, it's because it's linked to a specific context with some of these individuals that have come out of prison recently that have been involved directly into terrorist plots upon the release. It's been mentioned the case of the Vienna attacker earlier during this high-level meeting, but there were also a number of cases before that, and notably Sudair Shaman in early January in the UK, who tried to conduct a stabbing spree attack a few days only after his release from prison following a conviction for terrorist participation already, and the case of Usman Khan, who also killed several people about a year after his release from prison as he was participating to a rehabilitation / so-called de-radicalization program in London. So these cases happen. There is a real threat. There is a very legitimate concern among population, among policymakers to watch this, to do something about this. And as a matter of fact, recidivism and terrorist recidivism is very much at the heart of the criminal justice approach. When judges make a decision about a sentence and the length of this sentence, it's often motivated and justified along with the risk of recidivism. And when a decision is taken to release an offender earlier into the sentence, of course, the risk of recidivism is very much at the heart of the assessment and the measures taken in the context of that release. But I shall say, and perhaps you'll be surprised to hear, or perhaps not, because there was an excellent note, I have to say, that was circulated, written by the honorable member of the PAM about this very topic, but there is actually very little research available and very little data available on this issue of terrorist recidivism. We don't know so much and so well how many of these individuals who have been convicted for terrorism, when they come out, how many of them will actually re-engage or re-offend into terrorism. Generally speaking, an ordinary criminal has 1 chance out of 2 to reoffend. So recidivism rates, generally speaking, for criminals is between 40–60%. That's across many studies, across most countries in the world. But when it comes to terrorism, actually, that rate of recidivism, and this might be surprising to a lot of you, but is generally between 0% and 10%. And we can discuss why that would be the case, but that's also contrast with other forms of political or group violence, such as gangs, for instance, where the rates of recidivism into gangs is much, much higher than the average for criminals, whereas for terrorism, it is much lower. And there's plenty of reasons or explanations for that, of course. I just want to back up this, these numbers, these facts with some of the studies on which I base this assessment. And this is really why I wanted to have this presentation, to show you all these different studies that have been done specifically on terrorist offenders, calculating the risk of recidivism among them. And in this case, or in most of these studies, basically recidivism was measured along the criteria of a reconviction for a terrorist offense. And you see that on average, the rate of recidivism is around 3%. I have done myself a study where I've looked into the judiciary files and decisions of all individuals convicted for terrorism, jihadi terrorism, since the 1990s until today. So we're talking about 557 individuals. And for all of them, I've looked into cases of recidivism or re-engagement for those who've traveled, for instance, to Syria, but have not been convicted yet or died over there, so would not be convicted for that. And I have found a rate of recidivism of 2.3%. So basically that means that most individuals that were once terrorists, when convicted and after the release, the vast majority of them, even though we could always argue on the numbers, will not reoffend or re-engage into terrorism. There was, of course, one big exception in the studies, and that's Guantanamo detainees. There, the rate of recidivism and re-engagement was much higher, even though there was a contrary study that came up with a slightly lower rate of recidivism. So what does that mean? Where does it leave us? This relatively surprising, perhaps counterintuitive, certainly, finding of relatively low rate of recidivism. But first of all, as I've said clearly, recidivism is a hot issue, and there is already, and there is going to be an increasing pressure on governments, on legislators, on security services to monitor individuals convicted for terrorism that come out of prison. The public opinion will not tolerate these cases of recidivism. We can feel that even though these cases are relatively rare occurrences, like Vienna, like London, they hit the news pretty heavily. They create a lot of discussions within the lines of parliaments, and therefore that requires a lot of attention, that requires preemption also in preparing for these rare but important cases. And we know that when it happens, the pressure will be immense on the government and the parliaments. And notably, there will be pressure to take decisions, perhaps to vote laws into emergency. But the problem is every policy and every law should be properly informed. And the problem is, even in spite of the data that I've shared with you in the previous slide, which is basically almost every data that we have, the fact is we have little data, little research about terrorist recidivism. So it's only, we only have a sense of these low rates, but we certainly need more study, more data. We need more evaluation of the rehabilitation programs. We need more evaluation of post-penitentiary monitoring. We really need more transparency on data, on measures. And I think here there is a key role, and I will finish on this. There is a key role for parliaments to play, to ask for more and better data, to have a better view on the rates of terrorist recidivism in respective countries, and understanding the dynamics and the logics of this recidivism. We must resist ill-informed emergency responses in times of crisis following, for instance, an incident linked to recidivism, again, because emergency responses, ill-informed responses can be counterproductive, can be difficult eventually to undo later on. And above all, we need to ensure proper, quality and sensible post-prison policy. So we must anticipate any incident. And again, I think there is a proper role there for parliaments to ensure that everything that must be in place is in place according to the level of the risk that is there for all of us. On this, I thank you very much. And of course, I look forward to continuing hearing this discussion. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Thomas. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, great. Thanks really for bringing these elements of certainly the management of foreign fighters in particular and terrorist offenders in general in the prison setting, both during their term in prison, but also for the post-release reintegration, rehabilitation. But what is most even important, as you clearly pointed out, is the aspect of disengagement versus recidivism, and how policies are absolutely there too needed in terms to address both the possibility of real and concrete disengagement and accept the risk of recidivism for how much lower it can be than in general criminal data. But I think your reference to more research and informing policy development as based on research and accountability, it's extremely important. And that's what highlights even more, I would say, the role of parliamentarians in that. So thank you very much also for this reflection. And without any further ado, I would like to proceed further as we have a number of other speakers on the list, and certainly would like to hear from all of them. I would like, in fact, to introduce Brigadier General Davide Re, Director of the NATO Strategic Direction South Hub, which is based in the city of Naples in Italy. Brigadier General, caro Davide, you have the floor, please.
Good afternoon, esteemed excellencies. Thank you very much for this great honor beyond my imagination because of the level of the worldwide experts here represented. Since its very inception, the NATO Strategic Direction Hub, which I'm gonna refer to the hub from now on, has been engaging regional partners, experts, and relevant stakeholders to enhance understanding by integrating the regional perspective into the NATO mindset regarding extant and emerging global challenges, and which has been found through the southern region. The network of experts which have been developed have improved direct cooperation, which one of the key of the hub, which has proven to be invaluable, providing actionable insights which deliver outcomes to address and mitigate security risk in the region. The unique role of the hub generates frank dialogue with local and regional actors, garnering firsthand knowledge and experience to provide a universal understanding of common challenges, among which maritime security, piracy, transnational terrorism, human traffic and human smuggling, energy security, role of women and conflict prevention, radicalization, and foreign terrorist fighters dynamics. I will now briefly mention on few of the projects which have benefited from these networks. First of all, I would like to mention what the hub has consolidated with the ongoing and fruitful cooperation with the African Center for Studies and Research on Terrorism, an African Union Center of Excellence located in Algeria, specialized in analyzing the dynamics, the modus operandi, and the stabilizing effects of terrorist group activities on the African continent, and mainly specifically on Sahel. The hub is jointly developing the research with specific focus on the Sahel and periodically publishes a 4-month report on how terrorist trends are evolving. However, cooperation is by no means limited to this organization. Engagement has reached regional organizations such as the Economic Community of West African States, the UN Office for the West Africa and the Sahel, UN Office of Drug and Crime, and the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center to develop, just to mention a few of them, research regarding security and stability in the Western Africa, specifically in the area of the G5 Sahel and the Gulf of Guinea, and how the instability problems in this region are really intertwined. An important terrorism-related threat is posed, as you know, by foreign terrorist fighters and their families' return. The aftermath of the territorial defeat of Daesh with the fall of Baghouz in Syria in the Middle East, in the Middle Euphrates River Valley in March 2019, revealed the world that the fight against terrorists was not yet over. More than 2,000 foreign terrorist fighters surrendering to the international coalition among the 10,000 Daesh fighters, unrepentant and intending to preserve their combat power for future terrorist activities, along with the clear sign of radicalization in an old camp, just to mention one of them, in the northern Syria, where around 75,000 people were assisted, none of which were women and kids, as mentioned, evidence the magnitude of Daesh phenomenon and the serious risk for the future evolution into a Daesh 2.0 scenario. On this specific matter, the hub gained considerable awareness on the foreign terrorist fighters by sharing best practice with the Mediterranean dialogue partners through research on gender narratives on women returnees to the MENA region. This endeavor was based on synergy and cooperation with the academic world, in particular the University of Kent, the FemWise Network, the African Union initiative to strengthen the role of women in conflict prevention and mediation efforts, as well as through on-field research. FemWise, as you know, is a fundamental institutional pillar within African Union peace and security architecture, composed of hundreds of women, high-level experts in their field, including former ambassadors and ministers, to promote peace and security through mediation and diplomatic engagement across the African continent, in line with the conceptual framework of UN Security Resolution 1325, which endorses the importance and the role of women in the prevention and resolution of conflicts, peace negotiation, peace building, peacekeeping, humanitarian response, and post-conflict reconstruction. The specific study conducted by the hub demonstrated the centrality of the question of returnees to many countries in the southern region, for instance, with thousands of fighters and family members still in prisons, detention centers, or in camps in Syria, Iraq, and Libya. It's imperative to mention that this is one of the current and highly complex common endeavors for many Western countries. It's therefore a global challenge that we need to face together, and only together we can identify viable, effective measures to tackle it. The analysis highlighted the ability of Daesh, a very articulate gender narrative, to attract people to join the caliphate, as well as the effectiveness of gender narratives surrounding the return of women from Daesh-controlled territory, with specific focus on how this has affected policies toward them. Narratives aimed specifically at women stress how empowered they would become by joining the caliphate. There were promise of opportunities for studies, employment, and very often Daesh has exploited the evolution of the role and importance of women. Various opposing narratives were developed to challenge the Daesh narrative, depending on the local political and security context. As such, there is no single dominant regional narrative so far. In this regard, in 2010, Ambassador Suad Shalabi from FemWise, director of the Egyptian African Center for Women, notes that there is no regional approach, no links between the countries to cooperate yet on the question of women returnees. Two detailed case studies that we conducted in the hub on 2 northern African countries were carried out to investigate the dominating and contending narratives on women returnees and any initiatives aimed at engaging them. The sharp contrast between the two countries demonstrated the importance of the political landscape. Indeed, although geographically very close, they offer starkly contrasting narratives on women returnees. Political circles and new outlets were dominated by narratives of victimhood in one country, while the dominant narrative identified women as potential security threats in the other. Such different narratives has clear implication for the policies directed at women returnees and the initiative to be presented to them. Lastly, increased attention must be granted to the potential role of women, and women returnees in particular, in counter and radicalization programs through the region, including establishing and disseminating counter narratives and mainly sharing best practice. Focusing now on the Sahel, the region's complex environment is characterized by a large variety of non-state armed groups, which continue to challenge states in the quest for dominance. Structural weaknesses in the field of governance, infrastructure, economy, as we know, education, and social resilience, in conjunction with increased exposure to climate change, which is identified as a threat multiplier, is affecting food security, population growth, armed conflicts, and public health hazards, have all added to creating a breeding ground for non-state armed groups. Although the root causes of insecurity are found mostly in the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of the states and in a struggle to coordinate security enforcement along their borders, the perpetration of insecurity is fueled by these non-state armed groups across large areas in the Sahel. The typology, the agendas of these groups have been evidenced as diverse, often based on ideology and local circumstances. The main categories of these groups are violent extremist organizations, political armed groups, and organized crime groups. While insecurity in Sahel is largely dependent on the cumulative activity of the entire spectrum of those non-state armed groups, regional insecurity is mainly attributable to these views, whose activities transcend the borders of single countries. Based on ideology and alliances, groups affiliated to Al-Qaeda, which is subsidiary to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, and groups affiliated to the Islamic State, Daesh, operate across Central Sahel and Lake Chad Basin, as mentioned before. The expansion of these views from two clusters into the G5 Sahel countries, such as Burkina Faso, signals the intention and capacity of these groups to expand their activities and control areas beyond the Sahel to coastal countries, and not only those in the Gulf of Guinea. Since insecurity is the result of root causes pertaining not solely to the security domain, but also deriving from structural weaknesses and vulnerabilities, any strategy aiming to stabilize the Sahel should apply a multi-dimensional approach, with the ultimate goal being to enable states to overcome their challenges. In the security domain, such a strategy should focus on reversing the current VO expansionist trends, reducing their footprints, and establishing conditions for the return of legal authorities to those areas currently outside state control. A common central Sahel strategy to be endorsed by the major international, continental, regional, and national entities, UN, the European Union, the African Union, ECOWAS, G5 Sahel, the Alliance for the Sahel, the Sahelian states, just to mention some of them, could be really essential in order to properly coordinate various supporting entities in rebuilding state capacities. In this context, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean could offer its considerable diplomatic leverage for the inclusion of other willing participants, provided they subscribed to these provisions. About to conclude, the relevant states and/or regional security organization should be supported directly. Any long-term solution for stability in the Sahel, of which security is a critical component, can probably be found within the state and regional organizations, following the often cited mantra, African solution to African problems. As a result, assisting national military and regional initiatives, one example is the G5 Sahel Joint Force, the Multinational Joint Task Force, for instance, in building their operational capability is critical. However, contributing to the coordination of many willing international and regional organizations is also very important, is a key to achieve the desired stabilizing effect. Ladies and gentlemen, an old African proverb states, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it seems to be the most appropriate. The network which have been developed permit NATO and its partners to obtain high quality cooperation by taking advantage of their shared knowledge and experience, freely and uncensored, to better address key security issues and challenges with a view to mitigating security risk in the region. Thank you very much for the great honor and this great opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brigadier General Re. Thanks for bringing really the experience of the strategic direction to the hub and the network. I think it's all level multilateral cooperation are essential, and that's really what comes very clearly from your experience and the very valuable points you have raised. Since we have accumulated some delay, let me turn immediately to the next speaker, who is my dear colleague, Ms. Adamek, Larissa Adamek. She is currently the head of the Prosecution, Rehabilitation, and Reintegration Unit at the United Nations Counterterrorism Center in the UN Office of Counterterrorism. And Larissa will brief all of us about the challenges, but also the PRR possible responses and the UN framework that has been developed for that, and particularly how parliamentarians can facilitate that process. Dear Larissa, thanks for accompanying us, and please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mauro. Can everybody hear me? Perfect, thank you so much. Excellencies, colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored today to discuss the challenges of the post-territorial ISIS context, specifically related to prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration of foreign terrorist fighters, as well as their family members, specifically how parliamentarians can help, and what UNOCT and UN partners are doing to assist. And like Thomas, I have a presentation, so I'm just going to share my screen. Great. Mauro, can you see my screen? Hello? Mauro, can you hear me?
Yes, we do, and we see your screen.
It's fine, madam. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
We can see you. Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So as we all know, we've been the camps with ISIL, with an ISIL affiliated population in Syria and Iraq are facing serious concerns, and the role of parliamentarians is urgently needed. The concerns can be categorized along three general bases. The first are humanitarian concerns. We're all aware there's issues of insufficient food and water supply, which is leading to severe malnutrition. There are poor sanitary conditions, lack of health care and medication, which has exacerbated the effect of COVID-19 among the population, most of whom, specifically in Al Hol and Al Roj camps, are women and children. There has also been increasing violence within the camps, with several assassinations taking place in the very recent past. As well, there are extreme weather conditions, both in the cold winter and the heat of summer, that are making the conditions in the camps and the humanitarian concerns even more increasingly unbearable. There are also significant human rights concerns we're all aware of, including indefinite detention, violations of the right to fair trial and due process for those being held without access to fair trial, or with those in that it enables a truly all-of-UN response across both humanitarian protection as well as security and accountability imperatives. It will be implemented first in Central Asia in early 21. It's already getting underway, and will be, along with the government of Iraq, conducting a joint scoping exercise in Iraq to support implementation of the global framework and returnees in these countries. There are pooled funds that we have that are required to implement the global framework in these priority member states that have repatriated or are committed to repatriating their nationals from these camps. And so we are seeking contributions to these pooled funds in order to implement comprehensively. We also have several capacity building projects right now in Indonesia. We have one with Indonesia on probation and parole. We have one in Kazakhstan, Uganda, and Tunisia on violent extremist prisoners. We have one on child returnees in Tajikistan with UNODC, in Somalia on reintegration of women formerly associated with Al-Shabaab, and in the Lake Chad Basin with UNODC and CTED on comprehensive PRR approaches. These capacity building projects support government officials, judges, prosecutors, social workers, psychologists, probation and parole workers, and prison staff. In terms of how you, as members of parliament, can champion PRR, there's the incorporation of international frameworks into your national legislation and policies, and to really raise awareness on what UN support is available to key stakeholders in your countries. You can promote civil society in the PRR process, enable transparency and regular oversight over PRR mechanisms, and ensure that entities contributing to the PRR process have the resources and expertise to successfully support returnees, as well as ensure funding support to the pooled funds on the implementation of the global framework. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Larissa, for this excellent, very clear and informative presentation. I'm sure not only will it be distributed, but you are at disposal of any of the MPs participating today for any further information they would like to know about this very important initiative. We have, since we have some delays, let me thank all of the speakers for this session. We will go directly into the next session and then have a debate. And I'm most pleased to pass the moderation to our dear Excellency Secretary General, Ambassador Sergio Piazzi. Dear Sergio, the floor for the moderation is yours.
Dear Mauro, thank you very much. Good evening, good morning to all of you. We are covering a span of 10 different time zones in this meeting, which is really the first time, I think, for our colleague from UNHC and PAM together. We have now opening the high-level panel on regional cooperation and strengthening of counter-terrorism effort at the regional level. I have 4 panelists on the list, and the first speaker is Honorable Dr. Ali Rashid Al-Noaimi, the chairman of the Defense Affairs, Interior and Foreign Affairs Committee of the Federal National Council of the United Arab Emirates and chairman of our dear partner, the Hedayat Center. Excellency, the floor is yours.
First and foremost, good morning or good afternoon to all of you, and thank you very much for inviting me to be with you. I'm extremely happy to see, even virtually, so many friends who participate in this discussion about this extremely important issue. And I see that the results of this type of meetings, I hope that our very, very good friend, Mr. Vladimir Voronkov, will be just adopting all the results of this meeting. As you know, in June, we are going also to meet again in order to talk about the different elements and different methods. And I hope that all the people who are present here will be always working also together in order to really offer results. Dear friends, excellencies, when we talk about terrorism, we need to understand that terrorism is a world menace. It is not just a threat that just one country or one region is facing. This threat basically is just crossing borders, and we all are concerned with it. So that's why, in order to face it, we need to put our hands together, all the countries in all continents. So that's why I want to go back to my friend General Davide Re. He said, he talked about the African problems. We need African solutions. I don't think so. I think that the African problems need to have world solutions. So it's the whole world who is going to solve African problems, because the world now is one. So we're talking about the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. But the main threat is not in Syria or Iraq anymore. It is in Northern Africa and in many other countries also. So that's why we need to work at a regional, at an African, and also at a world level, because it is a real threat, and it is just disseminating throughout the Sahel countries. It is disseminating throughout also the whole of the African continent, the Eastern African Horn also. So that's why the whole world needs to work for it. So in the Middle East has a history of extremism, of violence that are due to many elements. But one of the elements basically that participated in creating the environment for the development of tourism regionally and at the world level was the politicization of terrorism. I believe that we need to put the politics behind when we're just fighting terrorism. The main danger is that many countries are using terrorism for political views and political reasons in certain regions. So we have to be very, very careful because this is how the Islamic State basically just was created, because it was after this political discourse that we saw in different places and different areas in the world that used religion in order to exacerbate the differences, in order to create a violence. So that's why the whole international community, the World Parliament Association, the Parliament Association of the Mediterranean, all the different organizations, we need to work very carefully in order to make sure that terrorism is not used politically, because terrorism is a threat to the whole world. And there is no one country or one region that will be able to face terrorism. So that's why we all need to work together. We need to put our hands together, all countries, all regions of the world. We need to put politics behind in order to fight this terrorism, because if we are not suffering from it today, we'll suffer it from it tomorrow. So the second thing I want to say is that we need to be based on a strategy that is based on two different pillars. The first pillar is just to work beforehand. We need to work in order to prepare ourselves for any problem or any menace in the future. So that's why we need need to organize initiatives, programs that will prepare us. We need to work on the preparedness in order to have all the tools, all the preparation, just in case there is any criminal or any terrorism threat in the future. We need to have national plans that are perfectly well prepared, that will use all the different stakeholders, being those religious, universities, all different stakeholders in the countries, in order to be prepared. So this is very important. We need to be prepared, and we need to be comprehensive. So any stakeholder, any organization, any institution that is able to really reinforce all the values, the profound values of the living together in the countries, we need to help them. We need to support this. We need to organize programs that will just put together all the different elements of the society in order just to reinforce the living together. In the United Arab Emirates, basically, throughout our history, we just understood that we need to present a new narrative, a narrative that is based on the values of the living together, of the loving together. We need to create a new narrative that really puts aside violence and the violent speech. So that's why the United Arab Emirates and Israel, basically, we just started a direction of peace. We need to create a narrative for the young people, for the new generations, that our Middle East needs to become a region for peace, for stability, for prosperity in the future. Because if we continue just reinforcing the hate speech, our future generations will be the victims, exactly the same as the past generations and nowadays generations. So that's why basically we need to change completely the narratives. We need to reinforce coordination. We need to reinforce cooperation. We cannot make politics be involved in this, because our peoples, our citizens, and all the citizens of the world, they have the right. They have the right for safety, for security, for future, for prosperity. And the only way to do this is just to base our work on values of cooperation, values of respecting each other. We need to have programs, we need to have educational programs and religious programs. I'm very sorry, I'm just being too long, but this is extremely important, and I hope that we'll have more and more meetings like this one in order to exchange much better, because this is the only way to move forward. Thank you.
Dr. Ali, I wish to thank you, and also for your suggestion. Indeed, a new meeting will be needed and will be needed soon. I fully agree with you. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Honorable Reinhold Lopatka, who is the chair of the ad hoc counter-terrorism committee of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and who is member of the Parliament of Austria. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear PAM President Alia Buran, dear Undersecretary General Voronkov, and dear Gennaro, distinguished guests and colleagues, in my capacity as chair of the OSCE BA Ad Hoc Committee on Countering Terrorism, it is a pleasure for me to participate in this important virtual meeting on the challenges of the post-territorial ISIL context. I have to say that despite the COVID-19 health crisis, events such as this one prove that it is absolutely critical to continue with our work and our policy dialogue, keep countering terrorism high on our agendas. I would like to briefly highlight the importance of strong partnerships and coordinated responses in this field. Since the establishment of our committee, we have worked hard to advance parliamentary engagement in countering terrorism through goal-oriented partnerships. And among others, we have established, how I see it, an admirable collaboration with PAM and UNOCT. On the one hand, our teams constantly exchanging and coordinating their agendas, which is very important. And on the other hand, we also organize the joint activities. Let me only mention two examples. In June 2020, we organized a joint OSCE, PA, PAM, UNOCT Parliamentary Web Dialogue on Countering Terrorism and Violent Extremism amidst the COVID-19 pandemic to explore together with experts in the field possible effects of the health crisis on terrorist groups and online radicalization. Secondly, we have contributed to the very important UNOCT consultations on a new parliamentary manual on facilitating the implementation of the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy, which is very important. And also we try to involve other parliaments in this work. So in April 2021, we are planning to support the organization of the Inter-Parliamentary Assembly of the Commonwealth of Independent States, a conference on countering terrorism, also together with PAM and UNOCT. In fact, I believe that our cooperation should be taken as a model. And I would like to really thank here publicly Gennaro for his work, and with his colleagues like Sergio and Vladimir. They are really doing a lot of work, which also helps us within PA OSCE. Dear colleagues, it is increasingly obvious that terrorist threats we are facing cannot be countered without a well-coordinated action. And so let me put the focus on northeastern Syria as an example where the humanitarian situation remains devastating. On 16th December 2020, UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mark Lowcock, briefed the UN Security Council. Displaced persons, as well as in the camps housing people with suspected links to ISIL. Al-Hol was mentioned with more than 50,000 people there. And also this camp where family members of former terrorist fighters are, like in Al-Roj. I have visited them. There are 500 women with 950 children in this camp Al-Roj, most of them with citizenship European countries. So it is also our task to find solutions, and it's our duty. And this bad humanitarian situation is aggravated by the fact that incoming international aid is being channeled through the central government in Damascus. And the situation there is not easy. And the capacity of aid agencies is also limited there. And now the situation is not getting better. Turkey's involvement now in Syria and in neighboring Iraq makes the situation even worse. So the local authorities, and I spoke with many members of these authorities, they are willing to start de-radicalization programs. They are willing to start fair legal proceedings. But if they want to have a fair trial for responsible persons for ISIL crimes in Syria and Iraq, they need a lot of international support. And so we should have, how I see it, 2 points in our focus. One is to support the local authorities in their efforts, which is very, very important to counter terrorism and violent extremism at its roots. on the ground, but also to find strategies to deal with radical and extremist movements which leads to terrorist attacks in Vienna. It was mentioned already in my hometown, Vienna. We were hit by an horrific attack, which was carried out by a young, radicalized man who was on his way to join Daesh, but he was stopped. He returned to Austria, and there, he killed many people, as we have seen it in other cities in Europe, like Nice or Paris. It shows how important it is to do everything to be successful in de-radicalization. What I want to mention is that we have to counter these terrorist networks with our networks. And the exchange of information, expertise, and good practices. This is very crucial in this context, and we must continue to strengthen it. Under the leadership of UNOCT, and we have to bring together all these parliamentary assemblies. Next weekend, there is a meeting of the Arab Parliament in Cairo, and I will go there also to involve the whole Arab parliaments in our work. This is very important. So thank you very much that I had the chance to take part in this, for me, and I think for all of us, very important event. I look forward to hearing more from my distinguished colleagues, and thanks again for the good cooperation.
Thank you very much, Honorable Opaka. Your witnessing the situation in the camps is really unique, and thank you for sharing that experience. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Ambassador Ismail Chekori, who is the Director of Global Issues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, African Cooperation and Moroccan Expatriate in Rabat. Ambassador, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Piazzo, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this very interesting discussion. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, honorable member of PAN, colleagues, friends from UNOCT, seated and other UN entities, ladies and gentlemen. Terrorism is a global threat, but with regional and local dynamics. In the context of our discussion, I wanted to reiterate our belief that both shores of the Mediterranean are part of the same space of security, stability, and prosperity. And we continue to believe that the Mediterranean space is also linked to the neighboring regions. And since we are talking here also about the evolving situation of the threat in Africa, in particular in the Sahel region, let me express the commitment of Morocco in working in the keywords. Within the keywords that has been shared today, which is cooperation. So cooperation is key, cooperation is fundamental in having an impact on the ground, impact on the situation in its different and various dimensions and manifestations. And that's why we found ourselves within our, let's say, commitments in natural positions in all the partnerships that has been mentioned in our discussion. Mediterranean partnerships, also the African Union, the Euro-Mediterranean partnerships, NATO dialogue, OSCE also partnerships. So we found ourselves in a natural position, and we continue to work within this shared responsibility and mutual trust we think are key in our response. Coming back to, and I share very much all the, the assessment that has been shared about the evolving situation of terrorism in the MENA region, but also in Africa. And let me just, without, coming back to the figures. Translate the evolving threat. Just, to mention two major dangerous developments of this threat in Africa. The first one is the proliferation of terrorist groups. This is I think, fundamental to take into consideration. A few years ago, we were talking about like 2 terrorist groups in the region. Now we are talking about more than 12 groups. The second dangerous dynamic is the expansion. While I think it's a valid point to continue to focus on the Sahel and West Africa, I think with what is happening and the dynamics, the threat is heading south and South Central Africa and even beyond Central Africa. And I think this situation deserves more attention. The third dynamic is the scale of the threat. And the casualties. A few years ago, we were, registering rather few casualties following the attacks. Now we are in beyond the 100 in at least the recent attacks in the region. And that's why we, while of course celebrating all the bold achievements across the region and beyond, we continue to believe that the challenges we continue to face deserves more commitment and more cooperation. And from there, I would like just to share with you with this, Morocco's involvement and the commitment shared.
Мы ездим что-нибудь из того, что у нас есть, у нас есть там вареники, пельмени, всякое такое, да? Либо мы что-нибудь
within the
закажем.
context and in cooperation with the United Nations, which is our universal home altogether in different regions. UN and its global counter-terrorism strategy remains the universal umbrella for all what we are doing at all levels, not only operational, but also at the international level. And thanks to this strong commitment with the UN, we managed to work on a very important project. And I would like to share with you some details. On October 6, 2020, Morocco and UNOCT signed a host country agreement for the establishment of UNOCT regional office for counterterrorism and training in Africa. This structure and this office will be based in Rabat. UNOCT, if I may, talk also about UNOCT in presence of the colleagues from UNOCT and Morocco share the same conviction that global challenges and threats, in particular those posed by terrorism, requires a global, integrated and coordinated response between the United Nations and its member states in order to ensure the relevance, effectiveness and efficiency of the actions of the international community in the fight against this scourge at the most relevant level. Through the creation of this regional program dedicated to Africa, UNOCT and Morocco aim to pool existing expertise and the resources in order to provide a quality training to countries of North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. And beyond the region. The ambition is really to have more involvement also from countries also belonging to the Mediterranean space. This office was operationalization is scheduled for the first quarter of this year. Will perform the following functions, in particular for the benefits of African and Mediterranean member states. Identification and development of a pool of national and regional experts and instructors, the development and implementation of training curricula in the field of counterterrorism policies, border security, as well as the management, reintegration, and reinsertion of prisoners convicted of terrorism. The identification, development, and dissemination of good practices, the dissemination of knowledge, tools, and the development of professional skills specific to city practitioners. Also, the identification, development, and promotion of ethics, values, and standards of integrity and the protection of human rights, strengthen investigative and prosecution capacities in the context of criminal justice, rule of law, strengthening the capacity of states and partners in the region to share intelligence and information at the national, regional, and international levels, and the development of tailored-made training materials that can be used by prison staff as well as specialists involved in post-incarceration and reintegration. I hope I was faithful to all what has been shared with the UNOCT, and I'm talking under their control. The establishment of the Rabat Program Office is guided by the principles of shared responsibility and mutual trust. The priority is to ensure that the Rabat's actions will be in line with the needs of African states, inscribed in the complementary of the various initiatives launched by African states and developed with the contribution of African states and shared among partners in a cooperative and solidarity-based approach. So this is last development of efforts that we hope will have an impact and have an added value in a complementary way with all the efforts to have an impact on the evolving terrorism threats in the continent. I thank you very much for your attention, and I will remain available for any question you may have. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you to you, Ambassador. Extremely instructive. And I have now the pleasure to give the floor to Honorable Dalan Halamad, member of the PAM delegation from the Shura Council of the State of Qatar. Honorable Dalan, the floor is yours.
شكرا سعادتك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Thank you, Your Excellency. In the name of God, dear friends, God's peace and mercy be with you. I am happy to add my voice to all your voices in congratulating the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean and the Office of the UN for Counterterrorism for the signature of this Memorandum of Understanding that will constitute a framework for cooperation and coordination between both parties, and that will open horizons for parliamentarians to support the work of the UN Office for Counterterrorism by putting their political and legislative resources at the service of the UN Office goals, and in helping to free humanity from this scourge that constitutes an obstacle for sustainable development and that is a serious threat for peace and security and stability in the world. We cannot end up with terrorism if we don't multiply our efforts and gather all the resources that we have at the service of this goal, but also if we don't reinforce international and regional cooperation to counter terrorism. So in this framework comes the signature of the Memorandum of Understanding between His Excellency, the President of the Shura of the State of Qatar, and His Excellency, Mr. Vladimir Voronkov, Under Secretary General of the UN for Counterterrorism, at the UN headquarters in New York on the 17th of February 2020, and also the agreement signed between their excellencies on the 27th of November 2020 for the creation of the Office of the UN Program of Counterterrorism that will be established in Doha. So both events represent another milestone in reinforcing the permanent and fruitful cooperation between the State of Qatar and the United Nations Office for Counterterrorism. I am sure that the establishment of the UN Programme Office of Counterterrorism that is in charge of parliamentarian participation in combating and countering terrorism, and that is based in Doha, would represent a qualitative added value to the efforts in this field. And it will reinforce parliamentary participation in building capacities for parliamentarians and for parliaments at the regional and national and international levels to combat terrorism and the violent extremism that leads to terrorism. Among the duties of this office in the future will be, first, to carry out studies and research and normative work to combat and counter terrorism and violent extremism through legislation and strategies that are fostered by parliaments. Secondly, to offer technical, legal, counseling services to parliaments in the framework of the implementation of the UN Treaty on Countering Terrorism. Thirdly, to support the creation and work of an international parliamentary network, as well as the creation of a platform for the international, this network and its maintenance as well. And also the production of a variety of means and tools at the service of parliamentarians. I'm looking forward for the support of all parliamentarians in the world. So we hope that the support to this office and its participation in its activity and contribution will be our future. We're looking forward to intensify cooperation between the PM and this office, and I hope for your support in mobilizing all parliaments and parliamentarians in the region to reach our noble goals behind the creation of this office in Doha. And thank you very much for your support.
Thank you very much, Honorable Dalan, for your precious contribution. Now, as Mauro already mentioned to you, we're on very late. I have many members of parliament who have asked the floor. I will start by one per country, and I would seek your pardon, but if you can speak only 2 minutes to make really the point. And as I was discussing with the colleague in the UN, indeed, we need an additional meeting really to go in depth for what is considered this very critical issue. And now in my list, I have Honorable Denouni from Algeria, then Honorable Bilal Qassem from Palestine, Senator Carlotti from France, and then Honorable Atay Uslu from Turkey. President Denouni, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Salam.
Good morning.
C'est bon?
C'est bon.
Mr. President, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much for this conference topic, very important for the PAM. It's not the first time that we deal with this topic, but it remains a very topical topic because most of issues on repatriation of terrorists to the countries of origin is always problematic for those countries. So the return of the Islamic State to our countries is faced by many countries. Many countries do not wish to repatriate them, but there are legal schemes from a legal point of view, for example. Different procedures exist that can be adopted to achieve short-term, middle-term, and long-term goals. But very often, immediate solutions are taken by the Mediterranean countries, are heavier sentences for people who committed terrorist offenses compared to other offenses. But other measures exist also to parliamentarians to prevent recidivism. And then there are longer term measures in terms of de-radicalization and rehabilitation to reintegrate individuals in their societies. But the efficiency must be assessed in depth. Then there is also the psychological support of people in prison and the social rehabilitation of sentenced terrorists. In Algeria, the former terrorists are protected by the National Reconciliation Charter. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And now I have the pleasure to give the floor to another Vice President of PAM, Honorable Bilal Qassem from Palestine. Bilal.
Shukran.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening to all of you. And thank you so much for allowing me to take the floor. We believe that the memorandum of understanding that was signed today between the UNOCT and our organization is something that we support and that we are very happy. And we hope that this will be a basis of a new strategy that is based on the mutual understanding and creating the best environment at all levels, being this those societal environment and political environment and all environments in order just to work for peace and stability, especially we Palestinian people who have been suffering for many years from terrorism, especially the organized and institutional state terrorism against our people, against our children, against our women, against our homes, against our olive trees, against our gardens and everything. And for example, there is an organization that is called the Youth of the Hills, Shabibat Tilala, who belong to the colonizers, basically, who are just carrying out many violent actions. And there are many camps, Palestinian camps, like Yarmouk and many others, who have just suffered a lot of actions carried out by many criminal and terrorist organizations. So that's why we, in the National Authority of Palestine, we do support this memorandum of understanding, and we hope that it will work for peace and stability. We want to thank all the people who have participated in the creation of this memorandum. And I don't want to be long here. And I want to thank Mr. Gennaro for and I hope that you will be calling also for a meeting in the future in order to follow up and make sure that everything that was undersigned is being implemented. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Bilal, for your input. And now I have the pleasure to give the floor to the head of the delegation of Turkey to PAM, Honorable Atay Uzlu. Honorable Uzlu. If not, I have the delegate from Syria, Honorable Hussein Abbas. Is he available? Okay, if I have our friend Omar Amayel from Palestine. Please, Omar. Omar, can you intervene?
We cannot hear you.
We cannot hear you, Omar. Omar, I cannot hear you, Omar. I can see you on the little screen, but I cannot hear you, Omar.
He has to unmute his microphone.
Omar, unmute your microphone, please.
No, he's still on mute. Oh, now he is.
Okay.
مساء الخير.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, Omar.
Brilliant. Good evening to all of you. I want to thank all the people who have just taken the floor. I believe that this meeting deals with something very positive, very important. So thank you for much. Thank you so much for the organization of this meetings with so many important experts about this matter in order just to exchange information about ISIL in the company, because in the area, because the victims of ISIL, we just lost the gentleman.
We lost Omar.
Well, basically, the victims are women, and we just re-lost him again.
Omar, we
Can
lost
you hear me now?
Yes. Maybe we can proceed.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Omar, we can hear you. I think we lost him. While we try to
No, we did
reconnect,
not lose Susan. We just
here?
got his video feed.
But we cannot hear him. Maybe while we wait from him, I would give the floor to our Turkish delegate, Honorable Atay Uzlu. At the microphone, Atay, microphone.
Sayın Başkan.
Okay.
Distinguished President, distinguished colleagues, thank you very much for organizing this conference, to PAM and also to UNOCT. I would like to extend my thanks to all of you. Counter-terrorism efforts are very important nowadays because of the pandemic and because of our efforts. They're going on in all over the world. Al-Qaeda and Daesh affiliated terrorist groups do have actions in different geographies, and they threaten the international security and stability. And Turkey, in terms of countering Daesh, is participating actively in the efforts, and also at the national level, and it is also having some cross-border actions, operations, and with the preventive measures, it is taking very important roles in terms of treating Daesh. And against Daesh, there is a global coalition, and this coalition, we are an active member of that coalition, and in Syria, against Daesh terrorist organization and against Daesh terrorists, we are the only country fighting one-to-one. We are the only NATO country fighting one-to-one. And thanks to the operations against Daesh in Syria and Iraq, more than 4,500 Daesh members were made inactive. I would like to repeat again, Daesh is the only, Turkey is the only country fighting one-to-one in the region against Daesh, and it's a NATO member. And also to decrease the movements of FTFs, Turkey is working, and up until today, more than 8,000 FTF suspects and foreigners were deported, and more than 100,000 FTF suspects were banned from entering Turkey. And countries of origin. In terms of repatriations and And in terms of repatriated, returned FTFs, in terms of prosecuting them, in terms of sentencing them, they have to take more serious steps. And this is the most important solution pillar of the problem. And the other issue is, in the field, we see PYD, YPG, and PKK. They are all the same terrorist organization, and there are structural linkages between them. They are all the same. They have no differences. And from time to time in the field, there are some other terrorist elements affiliated with them, and we are seeing that they are trying to be legitimized, and legitimizing them, PYD, YPG, PKK, legitimizing all these threatens our international security and security of all of us, and especially PYD, YPG, and PKK. In the region that they control, the Daesh members are being used as financial resources. So they release Daesh members for financial income. In international reports, we see this. For that reason, PKK, PYD, and YPG, for that reason, there has to be a serious counter terrorism activities against these. These releases, of course, threaten the security of all of us, and especially in the region, especially PKK, PYD, and YPG forces are using children as terrorist fighters. Turkey is notifying all the FTFs to the ambassadors, and it continues to repatriate them. And we will continue our cooperation in this field against some terrorist organizations. Sometimes we keep silent because they do not harm us sufficiently, but they are all threatening us, and we have to act together in terms of countering terrorism. I hope that this meeting will work for the blessings for our countries, and I would like to greet you all once again.
Thank you very much, Honorable Uslu. I have now on the list Honorable Amam Shokrane from the House of Representatives of Morocco. Is Honorable Shokrane online? We can see him.
مساء الخير.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Can you see?
We can hear you.
I'm going to be very fast. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. I just only want to talk about the title of this meeting. The subject of this meeting, to be honest, actually, the main challenges basically are just ISIL. And I believe that there is a main challenge here.
We cannot hear you, Amam. Maybe can you hear us?
نعم أسمعك.
Yes, I can hear you.
Do you have something?
Well, basically, I only have I have two comments here. The first comment is that regarding well, actually, I have two comments. In terms of challenges, we have a main challenge that has to do with ISIL and all the elements of information that we have tell us that Daesh is not dead. at all because of the situation that we have in the region and because of the presence of ISIL also in Africa. So when is it going to come back? Is it going to come back? I have another comment basically that has to do with the repatriation of the people who are just fighting with Daesh. There are just very few of them, and the percentage is very low. So there, the parliaments need to draw legislative frameworks in order just to help people in reintegrating their societies, especially women and children who were just basically obliged to be there in this region due to the lack of stability. So that's why I think that the legal frameworks in the different countries need to take into account these people. All the different committees need to find solutions in order to help all these people to come back to their countries. They need to prepare the practical and the legal framework in order to help these people, because we're just talking about women, we're talking about children who are in dire needs, basically, to be helped in coming back and reintegrating their society. So that's why I believe that through this kind of meetings, we need to find these different instruments and these different solutions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate. Now I have on the list Honorable Ammar Moussi from Algeria. Ammar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, dear friends. I want really to congratulate the PM for signing this memorandum of understanding with the UNOCT, and I believe that this is going to have a very good impact on fighting terrorism in the Mediterranean region. Thank you so much for organizing such an interesting meeting here. You know that Algeria suffered for many, many years from terrorism. So that's why we have gained a lot of experience in countering terrorism that we share with all our neighbors. And basically all this experience that Algeria has gained is based on different perspectives. The first perspective is to fight terrorism right there on the spot, and also to reinforce the personal ideas that push people to extremism. So we see that all Algerians just reject completely this scenario, this terrorism scenario. And also I believe that we need to work on societies against terrorism in order to make sure that we're just fighting terrorism and extremism in the different places of prayer, etc. We need to work on the educational frameworks. We need to reinforce all these values of living together and of respecting together also through all the different education frameworks. So we need to make sure also that we respect equality, that we help all the people, that we offer all our services throughout all our citizens in all the regions of Algeria. So that's why Algeria is just open for international cooperation. Algeria wants to really carry out a diplomacy that is based on cooperation, on exchanging information, experiences, on working in a comprehensive way in order just to face this threat, especially with our neighbors in the Euro-Mediterranean area. And I believe that all these elements will be able just to face this terrible scourge of terrorism. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Ammar. Thank you very much. I have two more speakers, and I ask you, please, 2 minutes. One is Senator Il Ashur from Algeria, and then we try again with Omar from Palestine. Senator, the floor is yours.
First and foremost, I want to thank all the people present here in this meeting, and we lost him. We lost Mr. Ashur. For talking about counter-terrorism ideas and elements. I believe that Mr. Ashur has the interpretation channel on, so that's why we cannot hear him. So basically, we need to work. Maybe somebody should tell Mr. Ashur just to.
Sorry, you are apparently.
He's on the English interpretation channel, I believe.
Channel. Yeah, you go. Yeah.
So that's why the interpreter is hearing himself.
Yeah. If
yes,
you can go
so
Arabic channel.
I want to thank all the presents here who are just here talking about fighting terrorism. That is a very important menace and threat that we have been fighting lately. Of course, we need to study terrorism through the different elements and the different perspectives. We need to understand also that we cannot only just counter terrorism by fighting terrorism, but we need to work on all the different elements that have to do with the repatriation, with the reintegration of the people back in their countries. So that's why what Mr. Gennaro said on the Mr. Gennaro just talked about the help that Algeria can just offer in. We are just very sorry. There are people just talking around Mr. Ashur. So basically, all the different actions that Algeria just carried out in the past, basically, at all the different levels, the emotional level, and also all the different legal levels and social levels, basically, just reached very good results. Because you know that terrorism is a very sensitive issue, and it really involves different challenges. So that's why we believe that all the different actions that Algeria just took in terms of countering terrorism were just very elaborate, very comprehensive, also in order just to face this problem, because you know that we need to take all those different elements into in order to make sure that we are just respecting human rights at the same time as we are just trying to redress all the different terrorists. We need to make sure that we just tackle this problem from all the different aspects. So Algeria has worked in the past in order to create a climate of trust, and in order to really create all the different elements that would push for the national reconciliation. So we worked with the different elements and the different people who were just related with terrorism. We worked also on the extremist ideas and extremist narratives against these narratives. Also, we took action against those who are just creating those narratives. We created also a legal framework in order to face these different threats. Also, we just worked in just offering all the help to the people who suffered from different acts of terrorism or extreme violence. We believe that national reconciliation was a very important process in order to improve the living together. The reconciliation also needs to be based on very important national and regional reforms and legal reforms, especially in order to move forward all together. We need to work also on the awareness rising also element that is extremely important, because most countries in the world are just suffering from this scourge, which is terrorism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have to conclude. Before concluding, I would like to see if the signal is better now for Omar. Omar, if you can conclude what you started before, and then we need to close the meeting. Omar, are you online?
Yes. هل تسمعوني؟
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, we can hear you, somebody said. So basically what I wanted to say was that unfortunately, we are just repeating the same scenario. Scenario Al-Qaeda in the 90s and at the beginning of the year 2000, and then we had the repeated scenario with Daesh, and here we are just focusing on just working on the effects of terrorism, but we are not just focusing on the different elements that led to the creation of these two different problems. Look at Afghanistan, look at all the countries. What I suppose is just to change our perspective and start working the sources of this problem and this scourge. And secondly, I just heard a lot about the calls for the parliaments to take a role. Why are we just putting the responsibility on the parliaments? Because the parliaments are not behind the creation of these different phenomena. We believe that the parliaments basically in the past 20 years did not take any actions when we saw that there was a very clear threat of the evolution of terrorism, because we see many parliaments in many countries and very important countries in the region and in the world that talk about this. So basically the parliaments have certain responsibilities, but we cannot just give them all the responsibilities behind what's happening, because many others and governments have this responsibility. So that's why I would ask the Secretary General to work in cooperation with the United Nations in just working on the different aspects that have to do with the Palestinian problem and the Palestinian crisis. So we need to work on this issue, because it's a very important issue, as you know, that we are suffering terrorism. You know that occupation is one of the most vicious forms of terrorism. Our people are just suffering one of this very terrible forms of terrorism. I want to say it again and again. In Palestine, we are against terrorism, but is there anything worse and more awful to oblige people to destroy their own homes with their hands? Ladies and gentlemen, this is happening nowadays in Palestine today. So today in Tamar, in many places, today there were many families who were just obliged by Israeli occupying forces to destroy their own homes in Wadi al-Hilwa, in Surumba, in many different places. They were obliged to destroy their own homes. And I want to repeat again and again, occupation is a form of terrorism. In the past 2 months, more than 170 homes were just destroyed, and there are thousands of Palestinians now who are in the streets. So I am calling, I am asking you, I'm begging you just to recognize that we're just suffering one of the most terrible forms of terrorism. We cannot continue this situation. There will never be peace in our region if we don't stop the Israeli occupation of Palestine and the rest of the Arabic lands, occupied lands in Lebanon and Syria. So we cannot live with occupation. And thank you very much to all of you. And
Omar.
I repeat again that
thank you very much.
occupation is the worst form of terrorism.
I will now go to the conclusions. We went far beyond our time. It is difficult for me to summarize the discussion today because many important issues were raised. Of course, today also mark the signature of a very important agreement for PAM with the United Nations, with the Office of Ambassador Voronkov, in order to better structure the already very good cooperation, but to make it more efficient for the future. We heard many experts, many representatives of our parliaments. The inputs were all of them extremely important. And all of you made the accent of the importance of parliamentary diplomacy, the role of parliaments in order to look at national laws, adapt them, adopt new laws in accordance with what are the needs as identified by the UN Security Council, as identified by the United Nations, are identified by our regional fora, in order to make the system more efficient in the global effort for the fight against terrorism in whatever shape it comes, and in all the countries of our region, and as we heard also in the Sahel and North Africa. Some of you have mentioned, I think I saw the consensus, that the status quo cannot continue, that keep terrorists and their family in temporary detention camps near the battlefield is not a solution, is not an option. We heard the experts saying that those terrorists who can run away, either they come back undetected in our countries, or they move for other operations in Sahel, where we see now this low conflict in Africa making more and more victims. We look at the states, the obligation by state to criminalize, prosecute, de-radicalize, monitor what happened to these individuals wherever they are. We looked at all the range of instruments we have to prevent the further spreading of violent extremism, how we have to change the narrative, how regional cooperation is bringing now 2 key centers, one in Doha and one in Rabat, to better prepare our experts, to be a forum for parliamentarians to share ideas, lessons learned, and best practice. Of course, PAM is there to support, to play its part. And as I mentioned today, this meeting is excellent to collect ideas, but it's also clear that we have to continue with a much broader debate. I see that on the experience that the colleague from Austria shared with us about his visit in the field, as soon as the situation will allow, PAM should continue in cooperation with the UN for a visit in northern eastern Syria to look at the camps, and with our presence provide even more pressure, if you wish, or more information to our countries in order to be better prepared with that caseload. We are speaking of tens of thousands of terrorists and children and women who are still in that area. Said so, the United Nations and PAM will prepare a report of this meeting. We will try to extract the recommendations, the ideas on how to proceed together. We are a community of states, we are a community of parliaments, and only working together, as many colleagues have said, through cooperation, through multilateralism, we can have an impact in the global war to terrorism, because no one alone can face the phenomenon and to prevent the spread, the further spreading in the Sahel, in Africa, or the individual attacks which we experience in our countries. Said so, I would like to thank all of you for the attention, for the contributions, and in few months we will have the PAM plenary session coming up, and I'm sure that one of the sessions will be dedicated to the topic we raised today, the lessons from today, and how we can be better prepared to face the phenomenon together. I would like to conclude by thanking the colleague from the United Nations, all the delegates and the experts who attended. Last but not least, the interpreters who helped us to communicate in different languages. And I would like to thank you one by one. We will do it as PAM Secretariat. And thank you again for the support and the trust you have in our assembly. I wish all of you a good afternoon and a good evening. Thank you. Merci. Shukran Jasila.
Thank you. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful
Thank you
meeting.
to all. Thanks very much.
Thank
Ciao,
you. Bye-bye.
Mauro.
See you all. Yes, bye-bye.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you. Thank you for
Thanks very much.
wonderful organization.
Thank
A
you.
bientôt. Bye.